All right, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 4:01 at the end of the third day of the conference, so make sure we get you out of here on time. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about open access ebook model. So we've titled the presentation Beyond the BPC, the book processing charge model. So looking at collective funding model experimentation and challenges in accelerating sustainable OA monograph, the OA monograph landscape. And today we're going to focus a bit on the not-for-profit landscape. That is the lens through which we're going to be speaking. So my name is Rebecca Sager. I'm the Vice President of Institutional Participation and Strategic Partnerships for Ithaca and JSTOR. I'm joined by some fantastic colleagues in the industry. We've got Tom Grady over here. Tom is the co-lead for COPM, the Open Book Futures Project, and based at the University of London. Also joining us today is Amy Harris, the Senior Manager of Library Relations from the MIT Press, who works on the Direct to Open initiative and many other things. And also joining us is Andrew Barker, who is the Library Director at Lancaster University in the UK as well. So partly you may be wondering why I've brought two folks from the UK with me. It is because that this proposal and presentation today was really inspired by a presentation I saw at the UKSG this spring in 2024. It was called Getting Out from the Back of the Sofa, and Tom and colleagues at Lancaster were the ones delivering the presentation. I left that presentation feeling really like that we needed to talk about the same thing here at Charleston. It was called Getting Out of the Back of the Sofa, and it was really focused on trying to think more strategically about investing in open access initiatives in the monograph space and thinking less about the end of the year money that you have left over, and like thinking about how we can perhaps collectively as a scholarly ecosystem kind of move together and try to make us advance this more quickly. So I was really inspired by this, and so I don't want to take credit for it because my folks over here really gave such a lively presentation. It was really interesting, and I hope, and I'm going to try to make sure we leave some time for discussion at the end. It really focused on three core questions. How can these new models achieve sustainability and get out again from that back of the sofa at the end of the year leftover funds? How can libraries continue to make a strategic case for investing in these models when budgets are being cut? And how can the sector work together to promote and maximize these alternative models in a world of increasingly tight budgets? So we're all going to give you a bit of our perspective on this from each of our lenses, and hopefully, again, that inspires you to kind of think differently about this space. So I'm going to just start with a quick overview of the current landscape of the space that we're in, and then I will turn over to my colleagues. So every year, 85,000 new monographs are published across the world annually. Only a very small fraction of these are being made open access at this point. But the good news is there is a lot of experimentation, and there's many models of collective funding, which we'll be focused a bit on today, and experimental models. And I think it's really necessary that we do that experimentation. There isn't going to be one right way to do this. So we need to be experimenting. And as Charlotte Lair from Lyrasis once said in a session, she said, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good." We need to try things. We are going to fail, but we need to try, and we want to have much more impact with the work that we're publishing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in later in the presentation. But as I mentioned, there has been difficulties in scaling these models. We're not making a huge dent. If you think about the landscape for journals today, it took a while to get there, but about 50% of new journal articles are made available open access when they're published. So the scale is there, but it's not happening yet with monographs. So entirely different economic profile to produce a monograph than it is a journal article. And there are other challenges alongside that. So some of the challenges are attitudes and perceptions about immediate OA. And I mean that not only from the library side, but also from the author side. We've heard a lot through the work we've done with JSTOR's Path to Open and the work with lots of university presses, some of which are in the room. We've heard authors are concerned about making their books immediately available open access, that it's a signal like it's not the best quality, or that the press might not believe that it has sales opportunity, or they might be worried they're going to lose royalty payments. But there's also the issue of like early career researchers being concerned about immediate OA impacting tenure and promotion. So these are some of the concerns we've heard from authors who are not wanting to put their books into immediate OA. There are systems, policies, and process. Especially the small and medium-sized university press landscape, trying to introduce brand new models into their workflow, it's really, really challenging when most of the time they're worried about getting the book jacket designed and editing and finding the best scholars and new emerging fields of scholarship and managing inventory and all that. And I'll talk about the university press landscape a little bit later as well. And business models. I think the experimentation I'm talking about today is evidence that there's, again, not an existing business model that's transforming this space really quickly. And I think kind of the purpose of being here is really to talk about how we can possibly start thinking about more strategically investing in these things to move this forward more quickly. So I mentioned, there's a number of new models out there today that are the good and the bad news is there's lots of models, because that's a lot to manage from the library side, a lot to manage from the publisher side. But they're all ending up doing something good, which is making works open access. We've got freemium models where if you buy something, you get something else free, or something else becomes open. There's institutional subsidy models where institutions are subsidizing the book processing charge, where they're paying for that on behalf of their authors at their institution. There's library membership models like Luminos at the University of California Press, where you join and you can help support that as well. Subscribe to Open. I think one of the most recent ones is the Pledge to Open from Taylor and Francis. The community and crowd-funded spaces where I'm going to spend some of the time, but the book processing charge, that is still the predominant model. But again, we're not moving things really fast if we're doing it a book at a time, and there's 85,000 books published every year. It is an exploration of all of these models. The outcome is good, that we have books that are open access. But again, the numbers are not, scalability is really challenging. So I'm going to now turn over to the amazing Tom Grady from COPIM, who's going to talk about his thoughts on this.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm not sure I've ever been called the amazing Tom Grady before, but I'll take it. Thanks, everyone, for staying this late. Last thing of the session, the highlight, the headline act. So let's get straight into it. Possibilities for global dissemination and increased citation publishing OA for books. It's already pretty well documented, so I'm not going to go over it. There's loads of articles and reports on this. One I would recommend if you're interested in looking at it, and I can share links afterwards, Me Too Lou Craft at the London School of Economics published a great blog post about this. Basically, demonstrating that, citations and dissemination is just increased. But reading industry reports from the Ithaca Group here in the States, and even the Crossic report over in the UK, which is nearly 10 years old now, but still quite relevant actually, you could argue that traditional sales of humanities and social science academic books are declining, and yet many of us in the sector are still working in much the same way we always have, largely based on a print paradigm. So the scholarly publishing world is changing yet again. It always seems to be changing, and the HE sector does need to adapt to this. And open access is a factor in these changes, whether you like it or not, I think. Though a side note for me actually is that a lot of the challenges around open are often conflated with the challenges of simply digital, which we could perhaps talk about in the Q&A. But open access is definitely a factor, particularly when the work produced has been publicly funded and the labour involved in writing and reviewing has been given willingly by scholars. So if you add into this mix, we're now seeing a number of policies and mandates appearing around OA for books. Today we've got OA book policies from several funders in the UK and in Europe. The Council of the EU has said that for publicly funded research, open access should be the norm for monographs as well as for articles. Here in America, of course, as you know, the Nelson memo didn't go that far. There's not really a mention of books in a meaningful way. Does that indicate a direction of travel here? I don't know. I know there's a colleague from the NEH here who could maybe talk about this in the Q&A. But that sort of brings me to my central point, really, which is what I think is the biggest challenge, and that's the economics of all of this. How to pay for a transition to open access for publishers in such a way that is fair and sustainable for both libraries and publishers. That word sustainable, by the way, another word I'd like to discuss in the Q&A. What do we actually mean by that? Also, I think important how to maintain the sort of bibliodiversity in a move to OA. Scholarly publishing is a really varied landscape. You've got large and small players, commercial, non-profit, publishing embedded in the university, publishing external to the academy. Policies and mandates need to consider that flipping to OA for books will present different challenges to these different parts of the sector. And that's particularly the case when funding is inequitably distributed, with some universities filing substantial deficits and others resting on significant endowments. In the UK, where I'm based, as of today, there are 73 universities with open redundancy schemes of one kind or of another, and they're all in HSS. It's a pretty challenging time for OA funding, and we get that. I also get, the libraries have other priorities, colleagues have other priorities when they're facing redundancy. But if we're going to do it, how to fund it? One way we could do it is to look to the journal world, where open access has been a thing for a lot longer, and where there are quite a few mature and embedded models for publishing articles openly. But in the journal world, the most embedded and the most dominant model for the production of open articles is the author pays model, or APC. So in removing barriers to the reader, we've instead erected a barrier to the author, and that's not great. And when you look at the book equivalent, the BPC, book processing charge, it does get more complicated, as Rebecca touched on. Books just cost a lot more to produce. BPCs just don't scale up well. They also privilege funded researchers, wealthy institutions, and established academics on permanent contracts. And they concentrate costs on specific research projects. That's really not good value for money. I'm a Yorkshireman. We're famous for wanting good value for money. It's not sustaining the press as a whole, the underlying infrastructure of a press. It's just paying for one book and that one book's costs. Now, I'm not here to demonize BPCs, actually. They actually can work very well. What I do think, though, is that if it becomes the dominant model, then we do have a problem. So my central point really is that funding a transition to OA for books using per book charges alone is actually financially impossible, I think. In the longer version of this talk that I did at UKSG, which you can probably be quite pleased you're not hearing me waffle for 30 minutes, but I demonstrated some maths about that, which I'm happy to talk about later if anyone wants to come and grab me. But more often than not, in essence, humanities researchers just don't have access to the money needed for a 10 grand BPC. Departments don't have it. Libraries usually don't have it. So we need other revenue models to work alongside them, and we need libraries to actively engage with these other models. So there are plenty of publishing venues for scholars, but more importantly, I think, so we don't end up with 5 mega publishers vacuuming up nearly all the available money, as has happened in the journal world. So in an OA transition for books, particularly if the massive commercial presses vacuum up this money, there's a risk to that bibliodiversity I mentioned, a risk that the smaller, the scholar-led, the mission-led, and the university presses, they get squeezed out, they go to the wall. Ironically, in a sense, the big stick of a funder mandate could actually inadvertently make life more difficult for publishers, for the small ones, if they don't have a funding mechanism of their own. So if BPCs don't scale well, what other mechanisms are out there? Rebecca gave you a whistle-stop tour of a few alternative models, so I'm not going to recap them. Again, happy to talk about them in more detail later. I'm going to highlight a couple, though, that we've been working on, because I'm particularly interested in the small, the micro, the medium-sized academic presses, sometimes subsidized by their institution, a host institution, not always, but all of which have to bring in revenue for their own survival. These presses find it difficult to transition to OA in a sort of safe or sustainable way. So here are 2 models that we developed at the Coping project. My colleagues on the Open Book Collective have developed a website and a platform where libraries can find OA presses or presses moving in that direction. And using the site, libraries can take out an annual subscription that, combined with subscriptions from other libraries, will fund those presses to produce new OA books. As of this month, the OBC has 10 publishers on the site, 3 of which are university presses, more to come. They've got 3 infrastructure providers on there, including our colleagues at OAPEN, who have featured heavily this week, and including our clever open metadata colleagues at Tote, because without open metadata, you often can't find these wonderful books. OBC is a registered charity, by the way, so it can't be bought out. I think that's an important point. My own bit of the project is the Opening the Future revenue model on this slide. If you'll permit me, this isn't just a crude plug. I want to just talk about it very briefly in a bit more detail, because it's a good example, I think, of one innovative approach to the economic problem. It's a mechanism, Opening the Future, it's a mechanism that can be employed by any small publisher. We've even put a free how-to guide online. We've been running it successfully for 3 years now with Central European University Press and with Liverpool University Press. It's on the Lyricist catalogue here in the States. Essentially, it's a subscription or a membership model to a specially priced package of closed books from a publisher's backlist. But the clever bit is the press uses the membership money to only produce new open access frontlist monographs. So it's kind of a lever. Libraries get something tangible for the money, they enhance the catalogue, press gets to gradually flip to OA. And you're going to hear it in a moment from Amy at MIT Press on their model, which is not incredibly dissimilar. One difference, though, being that it was designed, ours was designed for much smaller presses than MIT. A quick slide demonstrating the economics of how this might look in reality. I like to think this slide speaks for itself. I've just picked the 15K as an average BPC price based on, I think, the tome figure from a few years ago. With a subscription model like ours, library can get access to 50 backlist books for around well, $500, depending on the size of the library. And look at that compared to the price of the BPC. And then the second slide makes the same point, only hits you over the head with it a bit more, because, you know, talking about value for money, you're not just getting an enhanced catalogue, you're also helping to fund future monographs going open. I guess I wanted to particularly highlight this because there was a lot of talk in the UK about the Research Excellence Framework, the REF, where a lot of people came out saying, we can't do OA for books, it will mean the death of the humanities. And there are publishers in this room who have been publishing open access books for over 15 years and open access journals for over 15 years. This doesn't mean the death of the humanities or the social sciences. So to bring a bit of my talk to the conclusion, I'll just say it would be naive to pretend that my model is the answer to everything. Of course it's not, nor is the Open Book Collective, but then nor are BPCs the only answer. What my colleagues and I on COPIM are saying is these collective models work, and they're examples of another way of doing things. They're not huge right now. Our output at the moment is a drop in the ocean compared to the total annual output that Rebecca highlighted. But we have to start somewhere, I think. I would like to urge libraries to sustain presses that publish OA books in the fields that we value, or we're going to see a situation where our colleagues in STEM are fully open access, but the humanities and social sciences remain locked up in a diminishing ivory tower, really. Please try and work with these presses to implement these models, and then authors who come to a press with a book proposal will be able to publish without having to pay author fees. That's a much better situation for mandates and policies, of course, but also for scholarship in general and for academic freedom. One thing is for sure, if we want a different outcome, we need to do something different, because if we sit back and wait to see which models are going to work and not commit, then the models are going to fail, and we're going to be left with something very similar to the current unsustainable APC crisis in the journal world. Thank you.
Feels like an OA Books tag team. So there are people who know me in the audience, so you might take umbrage with the fact that I don't think I'm a drama queen. This is a pretty dramatic slide, and I'm going to admit in front of you people here today that sometimes, as I'm working on Diamond open access models at the MIT Press, this line runs in my head. I'm going to channel my inner Kate Blanchett and say, the quest stands upon the edge of a knife, stray but a little and it will fail. And because I'm, chin deep in open access all the time, I will say the stakes feel high because I and my colleagues know that open scholarship benefits authors, readers, and the academy at large, that we passionately believe that it has the potential to promote a more equitable, inclusive, and values-aligned scholarly ecosystem than a closed market model, but we also recognize that it has the potential to do the opposite. As at the MIT Press, we've consistently resisted embedding. We do use gold open access models, but we've resisted embedding them, APC and BPC business models, wherever possible, because we seek to empower green and/or do diamond open access. In building our open access model, direct to open for scholarly books, it was really important for us to reject BPCs as an approach that we feel only perpetuates and exacerbates inequity and exclusivity in scholarly communication. For all the reasons Tom mentioned, we know that that is not a scalable option. It's not a solution that will be applicable for every press, for every scholar, and the decisions that we make now will determine our direction of travel and lay the foundation for the future. So I think it's fair to say that at MIT Press, we have taken that stand, and there are a lot of incredible libraries, partners that have taken a stand with us. This fact is really palpable to me right now while we're actively renewing our commitments for direct to open. To those who are working with us across the board on journals and books models, I know I say this a lot, but thank you. Long-term support is really vital to presses like ours because these models, if we have consistent support, it provides more data across time, and that helps us measure impact, of which there has been quite a bit. So this is just a snapshot of where we stand so far with Direct to Open after 3 years. In the program's first 3 years, it has funded the immediate open access publication of 240 scholarly monographs, 159 in the humanities and social sciences, and 81 in STEM. 354 libraries, which is kind of a gobsmacking number to me, have supported this program for at least 1 year, and their support has allowed 339 authors based at 200 institutions in 28 countries to publish their work open access upon publication. The books in the program have been read. This number is already out of date over 600,000 times and counting. We know that these books reach larger global audiences, receive more citations than their paywalled counterparts. Pardon me. On average, our open access HSS books are used 3.75 times more and receive 21% more citations than their non-open counterparts. That's compared to the paywall books that we're publishing at the same time. And our open access STEAM books are used 2.67 times more and receive 15% more citations. So this impact is huge, and I know that Rebecca is going to talk a little bit more about that.
All right. Yep. So we're going to talk a little bit about impact of open. JSTOR is, as you know, one of the most heavily used databases in the world. So we have tens of millions of people using JSTOR every year. On the JSTOR platform, we have about 130-ish thousand ebooks that are available for purchase, and we have 13,000 that are fully open access. That's about 10%. Those 10% of the books get 50% of the usage of books on JSTOR. 50%, a massive amount of usage of these books. Just another, I know we're throwing a lot of stats at you, sorry, but when we sell a book on JSTOR, it sells on average to 16 countries. When a book is open access, it gets used in 160 countries. What this tells us, or should tell us, is that the monograph is not dead. The format, the legacy model is holding it back from being used around the world. You know, the fewer monographs that university presses are selling, the higher the price is getting, the fewer libraries that are affording it. The authors, the scholars that are conducting this research, their research is not getting read as much as it could have. And putting it open access is really democratizing access to this content in a way that, you know, we haven't ever been able to do before. So I feel open access has the potential to really amplify the work that's being done. And the work of university presses is really important. So I know Tom mentioned bibliodiversity. I think that's something that we need to emphasize. We have around 100 university presses just in the US and Canada. that bear the name of their parent institutions, but the vast majority of those are small and what we call small and medium-sized university presses with sales of less than 1.5 million a year. But these presses are often the best place in the world publishing content in specific areas, and that doesn't just happen. They develop editors who are embedded in their fields, who seek out new and emerging fields of scholarship, new and emerging scholars who don't have big track records of sales. And those are very risky things for a small and medium-sized publisher to produce. But they do it because it's really important for the field. They don't do it to make money. They do it because it's important for scholarship. And the truth is they are reliant on the academic library community worldwide to help support this type of scholarship. So it is truly an ecosystem that works together. And they want to find ways to be sustainable, to make it open access. And preserving this kind of publishing in this space is really, really important to all of us. And making sure this type of content is made available is really important. So, you know, the movement towards open is something that we want to find a way to make it sustainable. And as Amy mentioned, and maybe it was Tom, sorry, you know, the cost of producing a monograph is not insubstantial. It is not in any way, shape, or form related to the cost to produce a journal article. So, you know, it kind of, through the JSTOR Path to Open program, it is really that collective voice of the university presses wanting to work collectively with the library community and the scholarly community to help us find models that might help make it sustainable and allow them to continue publishing these kinds of works, and to make sure that they have a voice in the future of making it open access. We've got a partnership with the ACLS. We have a community team that's working together of scholars, libraries, and university presses to kind of examine our pilot and see if the model that we've produced in that, it could be sustainable or good pathway to open. I know I mentioned earlier about questions about the lack of trust or a lack of, what's the word I was looking for? Sorry. Lack of support in this space, the worries that authors have. But it's interesting to me that every time I'm talking with library groups about Path to Open, the first question is about the embargo period, which we have in place to make sure that we're examining this new funding model for open access monographs to see if it works. The first question is about that embargo period, but the second question is always about the title list. And I need to see the title list because I'm not sure these are the kinds of books I'll buy, or I want to see if these are books that, you know, would have value to us. And I will tell you that most of these small and medium university presses are not going to produce a book that doesn't have value. Like you know, that the books that they're and the content that they're producing is really high quality, but we're all concerned about it. So, you know, there's trust issues, and we need to kind of like experiment and work together, and that's what we're doing with the Path to Open program. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the provocative Andrew Barker to talk about his perspective at Lancaster.
Thank you. Provocative, nothing like be set up for a fall, is there? I'll see how I can do. I love Rebecca's point there around the models. The way I kind of take it is it's the model stupid is the way that I think about what Rebecca says, and I think that's bang on. It's the model. I'm really conscious that I'm a librarian in a UK university, and I'm also very conscious whenever I come to the US, we are two countries divided by a common language, and that's true not just in the fact I say lift and you say something else, but also in the fact that we work in very different environments, in very different cultures, with very different expectations. So my bit here is I feel really passionate that the role of the library in this sphere is to provide leadership, not simply provide a service. I think the days of providing simply a library service have to be behind us. We have to think very differently, and we have to think as leaders and as partners in the open research sphere. The point about there's no money, and there isn't any money, 10%'s been taken out of my content budget this year. I'll have another 10% next year. That's about £400,000 a year. But it's about choice. It's not simply about not having the money to do this. It's about where we choose to spend that money. And I feel very passionate about that. And there's some good universities in the UK who've taken the decision very strongly to invest in open and put aside money for open. We've done that at Lancaster, Sheffield have done that, and other institutions, I believe Sussex have as well, are doing the same thing. I am on a few advisory boards. I'm on the Institute of English Studies Advisory Board, and although there is, in the UK, and although there's fear about the humanities and open access books, I have heard colleagues around that table, academics, talk very passionately about the need to move to open access. Consciousness for monographs, consciousness, as Rebecca said, that it widens the global reach of their work. So it's something that I think it is now the time to turn attention to books. It's challenging. My VC is not convinced, but that's my job to change his mind. Obviously, we've heard from Tom around compliance with funders, which is a huge issue we face as well. And the legacy ways of publishing are just that, legacy, sticking books on shelves that some people who are lucky enough to be in libraries or have access to libraries can read if they choose to, is just not sustainable, that word again, for the future. We need to make sure that books do have that reach. So I think what's really interesting, this is picking up what other people have said, is our opportunity to try new ways of publishing and libraries positioning themselves as leaders in this space and investing in open access book models as we do at Lancaster, which I'll talk about in a second, to ensure that it enables that experimentation that Tom's talked about and other speakers have talked about. It is about experimentation. As somebody said to me, it's about, let's throw things at the wall and see what sticks. What doesn't stick and hasn't stuck for a long time is the current model of doing things. So we have to think anew. So where we are trying to take a leading role at Lancaster, and where we work really well, I think, as partners, is guidance. So a colleague of mine, Tom Morley, has just published a guide to publishing open access monographs. He's in a post funded by Research England because part of the move towards the next but one now research excellence framework is around open monographs and research culture. So the library's been funded to put Tom in this post on open monographs. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. We would have, if we'd said, can we get money to fund a post, would have been laughed out of the university because libraries provided services. But no, we are at the heart of pushing the culture on in terms of open monographs. And I wanted to flag up what Tom's done because it's a great guide. There's the title, you can find it easily enough. You're either librarians or you know librarians, so you don't need me to provide a link. So that's one thing we're doing. We're working with Liverpool University Press, I'm really close to have worked with quite a bit, on a project called Trailblazers. We're also a part of the Copum Open Book, Futures Open Book Collective. We co-lead on that at Lancaster. We've got funded library posts from that. Trailblazers is a partnership with the University of Liverpool, Salford University. If you don't know where Salford is, if you like music, it's the Smiths, Salford Lads Club, made famous. It's near Manchester, but it's not Manchester. Get shot if you say that. And Liverpool University Press and Lancaster. And the idea of it is to work with early career researchers. And it's not just about publishing, it's also about boot camp and working with early career researchers to help them understand what the publishing world is like, how to get published, and to work with them from the start of their career around open access publishing. So it's a Liverpool University Press project. I live in Liverpool, and you might think, oh, this is a terrible idea. What good ideas have ever come from Liverpool? There's a photograph here of 4 Scousers in 1963 at the Queen Square, Queen Victoria statue in the centre of Liverpool. People told them they were talking rubbish as well, and within a year they dominated this country. So you never know, sometimes good ideas come from Scousers. And to be perfectly honest, Amy putting up something she loved enticed me to put something up that I love. Always have a good look by putting the Beatles up. There we are, that's from me to you. That's us done. We have got 5 minutes for questions, bang on 5 minutes for questions. We have had a question from the app, which I'm going to invite Amy to come up and answer. So the question is, where do you see the publication and promotion of open access books in the future? And that gives you a couple of minutes to think of your own questions.
So, I ran into Curtis Brundy on the street outside, which is how we often do. And he was telling me, I feel so positive this year because we're talking, all the conversations are about open access and we're all doing it different ways. But the point is that the product, there is more open access content out, building a public knowledge commons than ever. And that's something to be really proud of. So I would say more of the same. I wear the hat of marketing, many hats at MIT Press. And as far as promoting open access books, we promote open access to our authors. We knew that open access was going to be very popular with MIT Press authors, but it's been an education that way. We talk to readers about it. We advertise the open access editions, and we just want to be doing more because, again, the impact, the diversity of citation, the metrics that we see coming out about how this is benefiting the humanities and social sciences, perhaps even more than the STEM titles on our list, is really, I think, meaningful. I want to
turn it around. So, there might be a person who asked the question in the room who has a view, or there might be somebody else who has a view, and I'll ask the question again, but we'd like to hear from you on this one, not just us. So the question was, where do you see the publication and the promotion of open access books in the future? Does anybody have a view? I think that's referred to as tumbleweed.